Okay, any questions, comments? Start with Mike and then Cynthia.
While I don't represent Marin County, I'm certainly very concerned about transit throughout the Bay Area. Can you better explain why SMART was not recommended of the four choices in this?
Sure. The most obviously SMART is a project that that the region supports and is in Plan Bay Area, and we have an interest in moving it forward. But this project is adding. These are two-car train sets for the most part, and this would be adding an additional car.
I understand.
To several of those. Yeah. So that's just to get everybody to understand what the project is. The first reason why staff did not recommend is because it's not part of the Core Capacity Challenge Grant Program. So what the commission directed staff to do was to prioritize those projects. So that's kind of why you see the AC Transit, SFMTA, VTA up on this list, because these are projects that are fitting with the Core Capacity Framework. So that's really the major reason why SMART was not recommended by staff. Obviously, it's still staff and MTC don't get to necessarily make these decisions ultimately, so it's still in the pool. Cal STA gets to decide, but that's the primary reason.
Okay, I mean, I guess, I can't argue with that. I mean, because I don't make those decisions, but what bothers me is that SMART has had funding problems because the quarter-cent sales tax has not produced enough money to do the entire project, and they haven't had their hand out like many other agencies in the Bay Area. And I think that this one time that they do, they probably don't have a good likelihood of getting it. And if ever driven the 101 corridor, it's just as bad, if not worse, Interstate 80 or 237 in the South Bay, or 85, or 101 in the South Bay, or 680. And even if they couldn't, even if you could put $11 million in there, it'd be nice to see something in there so they can get something out of it.
Cynthia.
I have the same question, but coming from the viewpoint of the GHG reduction is the biggest one, and it seems like if your criteria was to reduce greenhouse gas, even if it's not part of the Core Capacity Framework, that should have been an overriding consideration in looking at giving money to SMART. So that seems very not achieving purposes by eliminating the biggest reduction from consideration.
So let me respond. That's a very important point you brought up, and I want to respond to it. It kind of speaks to the asterisk that's on the slide. These GHG reduction numbers are self-reported by the project sponsor. So there's a number of calculations that they have to go through. There's a number of variables involved that kind of ask the sponsors different questions. And there's a verification process that the Air Resources Board and the state go through in looking at these calculations, and generally making sure that the variables, the project sponsors are using variables that are fair and that are kind of backed up by evidence. And so obviously SMART's GHG number is the highest. One thing that staff at MTC noticed when going through these proposals were that, so again, and this is why I talked about the project. The SMART project is adding an additional, it's not getting SMART up and running, it's adding more capacity to SMART. So what staff would expect is that SMART would actually look at, for one of their variables for GHG is ridership. So actually look at the incremental ridership that would be added through the addition of these cars. What SMART did instead is that they included the capacity, not ridership, the capacity of the entire line for that variable, which we thought was potentially not the way we would have done it if we had done this estimation. And is certainly not the way that the other project sponsors approach this question. So while the GHG reduction is higher, and that is the number that is currently in their application, we just wanted to point out that this is subject to verification by the state. We've had some discussions at the staff level with SMART about the assumptions that they use.
Well, I can understand if it's not apples to apples, but it would be good to at least to give it some consideration to a number that is a factor, multiple factor higher than all the rest, even if it's not 100% accurate. The other thing that makes sense is there's very few options in the North Bay. We have one freeway, where all these other places have multiple options, so it seems like that should be part of the criteria too. So I guess what I'm doing is questioning the criteria.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Let's go to Bob, then Mike.
Two questions. One is a follow-up to that. If you did, do you have estimates if you based it on ridership? On your estimates, what the greenhouse gas reduction would be?
So I'll just kind of point this out. So the ridership for not to get into Smart's business too much, because this is their business and they hire their own consultants to do this analysis. But the estimated forecast for Smart in terms of their whole line, it's in the range of like 2,000 to 5,000 a day. So that's currently, that's what they have in terms of 2 car sets. Now, if you add a third car, I think you could make some kind of estimate that may or may not draw some additional riders. It may. We're adding capacity to the train, so it may. What's Smart, the number that Smart used was over 30,000. So that, and the number that is the total capacity of the whole line. Literally, you're squeezing everybody on it. There's no room to move. So that's the capacity. So that's the number that was plugged into the GHG calculation. It was over 30,000. I think if we had done it, the number would have been 30 to 50 times lower than that.
Well, I mean, that was my point. I mean, even based on that, if you went 50% lower, does the GHG reduction drop the same ratio to like 600,000? Just still, double what? I mean, I'm just.
No, it would be probably in the neighborhood. We'd have to do the calculation. This is something that Steve is, I think, wanted me to do. Although I think there's other variables also involved in the calculation, which we'd have to check with Smart to make sure that we're getting. But it would be considerably lower than that, and considerably lower than the AC Transit calculation.
Okay, that was kind of.
Maybe Bob, I could just chip in. It's a fair question. We got 4 projects. Why don't we recommend all 4? Why are we picking on Smart, right? I do think there is some concern that when Smart opens for business, they may not have full trains. And I think the smarter, maybe I shouldn't say that. I think the better way to approach this request is to see how they do with the trains they're going to run. And if they are leaving people at the train stop, then we're going to be the first guys helping them find new cars. I frankly do not think that's going to be their problem in the early years. I think like most startup systems, they are probably going to struggle a bit with ridership, and they will build it over time. So I don't think we're here saying this is a bad idea. I think we're here saying it's probably a bit premature, that before you start buffing out your system, why don't you start running it and see how it attracts riders. And once you do, then I think you're going to have a much firmer ground to request funds from the state. And remember, these programs are every year. I think, as Matt indicated, we fully expect that the numbers that we've shown you in terms of what's available, those are low. And so that's going to improve everybody's prospects, not just in the first cycle, but in the ones to come.
One is $20 million for Smart. I've always been very supportive of Smart. I was very disappointed by Larkspur's stopping with a line from going all the way to the ferry. Has that been corrected?
I'm afraid it hasn't, Rich, and I'm just as disappointed as you are. We did double check because, as I think many of you know, we have a policy that conditions our investment of regional funds that we need to see sufficient land use supportive elements along the corridor for us to invest. And I think Smart still has that, even though Larkspur, they didn't even spend all of our grant that we gave them to develop a plan. They just stopped. And all I can say is that I think the climate in Marin is right now just a little bit unbalanced when it comes to discussing these questions.
That's kind.
But look, we're going to get it looks like we're going to get the extension there, and maybe they'll come along later. That's as you know how we've done a lot of the BART TOD development. We didn't do it when we built BART, which is when we should have done it. We've done it in a retrofit sort of after the fact way, and maybe we'll have to do that with Smart.
It seems to me that I'm trying to remember in Larkspur that a lot of the business development is near the ferry, and it seems to me that any business person would want people getting off of a train much closer to their businesses. All of the urban development in the city I grew up, where you have these neighborhood shops where the crosses of streetcar tracks. It's just
Yeah,
a
I think
natural
it's not
growth
so
of
much
business.
business or commercial development, Rich, it's housing. That's what the neighbors didn't want.